his phrasing and stuff is so unique. I just did an interview about Willie Nelson, and we were talking about phrasing being completely unique and original and all that, and very much like a jazz player. And as I was speaking of Willie, I felt like I was speaking about Bob. There's such a similarity in that they both are completely unique with their vocals. Sonically, you know, the way their voices sound and the way they phrase. And it's just, and so I put them both in a jazz category. They don't sing like the typical rock singer.
There's never any, you know, here's a count off and here's the tempo and this is the kind of feel I want, or this is what I want you to play, or listen to the record. And it was all very like jazz, like Jim Keltner says, like jazz, you know, feel it and get a groove and don't play the same thing twice. And just from day to day, when we played the song that we had played yesterday, it was completely different.
It would be like learning to play with him on songs like Romance in Durango, where he might just hold a note for like 4 seconds sometimes, just because he felt like it. Between his music and the way he played it, it was really all about knowing how to really stick like glue to what you're hearing and roll with any changes, you know, and really all about improvisation.
Bob came out and it was like, hey, man, you know, like reunion. And then we went into the studio and Blake Mills was there and they played the song. And I heard it and I just couldn't believe it. You know, in rock music, things usually have a specific beat and pulse. Drums play a certain, whatever it is, but there's always a specific pulse. And this was not, this was rubato, this was free. The time was free. It was elastic. And it reminded me so much in a different genre. It reminded me of that played like I did in college. I played jazz and we loved to play freely, that where it wasn't specific to a certain time feel or tempo, or it just kind of moved and flowed. And I remember I was done listening to the track and I turned to Bob and I said, my God, I said, this Bob, this sounds to me like A Love Supreme, you know, John Coltrane's great record. And he just kind of stopped and he looked at me. I thought, oh, I'm going to get fired again.
But he was the most interesting cat I've ever worked with, let me tell you. Yeah. And, you know, being a big jazz fan, I never worked with Miles, but I've seen a lot of video of Miles and the way he handles rehearsals and the way he handled, and I've listened to a lot of studio tapes of him in the studio. And it kind of reminds me of Bob in their cryptic way, the way they get things done. You know, it's not really the normal way, but it's a little cryptic how they get people to do what they want, musicians to do what they want to do without really saying, play a G or something like that.
So how do you play darts when someone keeps moving the board, you know, and like, and it's kind of like Miles Davis. I don't think he gave a shit what you were going through the night before or tomorrow. You wanted whatever the fuck it was you had that night, and I understand that.
It was exciting all the time. That's the thing. And Dylan is responsible for that primarily, you know, because he lived more in the present than most musicians I know. When people ask me, they say, "What's it?" You know, but the first common question I get is, "What's it like to play with Dylan?" Right? I mean, I'm sure every musician in the world gets that who has worked with him. And my comeback is, I would say, "Oh, it was the greatest jazz gig I ever played." And they would look at me like it was crazy, you know, like, I mean, it was like, I get that RCA Victor, the dog listening to his master's voice, you know, that thing where he said, and they'd look at me, they sort of tilt their head. And I said, yeah, because you know, I mean, it was the most spontaneous gig I ever worked. I mean, it was, in that sense of the word, I didn't mean stylistically it was like a jazz gig, but in terms of the mindset, it was.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the poet laureate of rock and roll, the voice of the promise of the 60s counterculture, the guy who forced folk into bed with rock, who donned makeup in the 70s and disappeared into a haze of substance abuse, who emerged to find Jesus, who was written off as a has-been by the end of the 80s, and who suddenly shifted gears, releasing some of the strongest music of his career beginning in the late 90s. Columbia recording artist, Bob Dylan.